Good morning. We're here with Chris Iacono. Now, Chris, welcome to the Cruising Yacht Club.
Thanks, Peter.
You've been here a long while and 50-year plus member. How did you first...
55 years, I think.
Terrific. How did you first become involved with the CYC?
Well, as a youngster, I lived at Neutral Bay. I went to school at Milsons Point, and I often used to take the ferry to school, although it was longer, just to look at the boats in the harbour. And around 1945-46, when the Hobart race first started, it was the flavour of the month, and big boats were there like Christina, Archina, Kurrawa, and I just loved boats. I loved water. I just loved to see them floating there. And then from that, I started to get involved with people I knew that were sailing or belonged to clubs. And Norman Milne, who was a manager at Caltex at the time, and I was a Caltex dealer, he introduced me to the club and said I should join it, and he sponsored me to join it.
And did you do any little boat sailing prior to that at all? Or?
No, I never got my bum wet in little boats. I first started sailing at 27, and my first boat was a Thunderbird, which was a 26-foot plywood boat.
Yeah, and a bit unfriendly, you said, I think, didn't it, this Thunderbird to you? Wasn't the boat for you?
No, it wasn't a very nice boat. I nearly bought a Bluebird, but then I was introduced to Thunderbird, and it was the answer to the Bluebird, but it wasn't the answer to Chris's boat.
Yes, yeah. And then from there, I mean, you bought another lovely little boat, didn't you, after that?
Yes, well, I sold Pinter, the Thunderbird, quite quickly. I think we only had it for about 12 months. And then we bought a house on the waterfront, and of course we didn't have any money left after that, so no boats for about 4 or 5 years. But then we started looking around at boats again, and one of the boats we looked at was Christina. And it was pretty dark and dingy downstairs, and I said, no, this is not for us.
And she won the second Hobart race,
She won the second Hobart race, but it wasn't because of that. It was just, I wanted a flush decker and that sort of a boat, but it wasn't the boat for us. So we then still hunted around, and we eventually downsized to a 30-footer, which happened to be Samiel, and it was my dream boat. I set a criteria for the boat. It had to be wood. It had to be. It had to have Barlow winches on it. It had to have an aluminium mast, and of all things, it had to have a toilet where you could walk in and shut the door and sit on the toilet, which I didn't have. So Samiel really was the answer. And then I went off sailing, and I sailed for about 15 years with this club with the boat, and it was very, very successful.
So did someone sort of teach you to sail, or did you just learn as you went along?
Well, my first teacher was a guy called Frank Byer, who wasn't a member here, but was a sailor and did a few Hobarts. But he just couldn't get the message across to me. But once I bought Samiel, it fell in love with me, I fell in love with it, and we taught each other to sail, really. Yeah. If you get a really good boat and you're really interested, I think you'll learn that way.
Well, in later years, Samiel ended up back here at the Cruising Yacht Club with the late Alan Stanton, and he kept it in immaculate condition as well. She was a lovely little boat.
Yes, he did. Yeah. We kept in contact with him a lot too.
Yeah. Now, history dictates that you had a bit of a drama on the harbour one Wednesday afternoon. Let's talk about that.
Well, I used to sail with my next door neighbour, Les Wildman, from the Wildman family, and he had a boat called Unilas, which was probably a bit like a 5.5, no engine, just a day sailor. So we used to sail Wednesdays, and we were sailing in a Wednesday race out of Middle Harbour, and we were just around the corner from Bradley's Head near Taylor's Bay, and we were all becalmed. There would have been about 15 or 20 boats in the race. The next thing we heard a big flash of siren from a ship, and around the corner from under the harbour bridge comes this ship, which would have been 15 or 20,000 tonnes, I suppose, and it was just bearing down on us. Everybody started their engines and motored away, but we just sat there. So Les gave the order to abandon ship, but as I was petrified of sharks, I said, there's no way I'm getting into that water. I've seen too many sharks here already. So I sized up the ship and worked out that if I was right up the front of the boat, we might miss it. So I ran up the front, held onto the forestay, and the ship hit us in the stern. and the boat went down the side of the ship, and one of those portholes that gathers air was sticking out, and it knocked the forestay off, and the mast stayed up, but sails fell out everywhere, and the ship kept going. And eventually I looked around, and there was all my crew in the water. One guy had lost his gold watch, another one had lost his wallet, and here I was dry as a bone, still on the boat. So I got reprimanded very severely by Les for not jumping off, and I said, well, Les, proof of the pudding's in the eating. I'm here and you're all wet. But there was a marine inquiry into it, which was hushed up a bit. But we're all here to tell the story.
Yeah, good. And what are your early memories of the club here and some of the characters at the CYC?
Well, when I joined the club, the Commodore was Bill Saltus, and I remember vividly him shaking my hand and welcoming me to the club, and it sort of did something to me. It said, look, you're going to stay in this club, you're going to do something, and it's your club. And I kept in touch with Bill, still do to this day. And then through Norman Milne and a lot of his friends like Jack North, Alan Campbell, I sailed with Norman on his boat. I think it was called Karura. Yes. And I prepared it for them for Hobart. I didn't go on it, and I still have never been to Hobart. It's my dream before I get to 90 to go to Hobart one day. But
there's a couple of ships or aeroplanes go there.
Yes, I know. I've been to Hobart plenty of times by plane. So I used to come to the club a lot. Then when I bought Samiel, I virtually lived here. We raced out of this club, and we used to be here after every race. We would come and collect prizes and so forth, and we got plenty of those.
Well, you mentioned Bill Saltus, Alan Campbell, Jackie North. They were real workers, tireless workers for this club, weren't they, and made it what it is today. Yeah.
Particularly Alan in the archives, you know. And they were we've got to remember we're in an era that will never happen again. There are still people around like Mick York, who were the original instigators of this club. Now in 10, 15 years' time, there will be new people here and doing good things, but they're not the people who started the club. So we've got to really get all those archives into on paper so that our future sons, grandsons and so forth can read about all that.
Now tell us, you're absolutely correct there. Tell us about a Montague race you did on Saga with Lindsay Little. That was a good story for you.
Yes, I knew Lindsay Little. I owned a Caltex service station at the time in Neutral Bay, and Lindsay was one of my clients. And he called in one day to get petrol, and he just said to me, what are you doing on the weekend? I said, oh, nothing much. Would you like to come for a sail? Yes. So we arrived at the squadron, and I brought a friend of mine called Michael Lockwood, who I went to school with me, and we jumped on Saga, and we said, now what do we do? And he said, oh, just throw your gear in the bottom there, and see that life raft, which was in a soft pack, would you take that downstairs and put it in the toilet? And I said, well, shouldn't that go up on deck? I said, no, we won't be using that, so don't worry about it. So I said, I looked at Michael looked at me and thought, well, this isn't starting very well, but anyway. So we put the life raft down there, we started the race. It was blowing about 40 knots from the south, and everyone set a kite and off they went. We didn't set a kite, we just kept the Genoa out in the main. And I said to her, being a skipper, it's very hard to sail on a boat with another skipper, particularly, you know, if he's not doing things right. And when we got to the heads, Lindsay just said, now look, these are the watches, and Chris, you and David have the first watch. Chris, you can steer the boat for the first watch, and off they all went to bed. And I'd never steered a boat in a 40-knot southerly for a start. I'd never steered a boat with a steering wheel, and I'd never been to Montague Island. So I said to David, look, you do all these things and I'll just watch for a little while and then I'll pick it up. And I remember vividly the sail number was 32, and I looked up at the sail and I said to David, there's a little split at the back of the the luff of the sail. He said, oh, don't worry about it, it'll be all right. That split eventually tore right to the mast. So we had a burgee with 32 written up on the top of the mast, and the rest of it was in the cockpit. And I said to David, look, I think we should call Lindsay and get him out. And he said, oh, Lindsay doesn't like to be disturbed when he goes to sleep. I said, well, I don't care, we're going to get him out. So we got him out. We asked him if he had another main, and he said he did. I said, where is it? He said, I lent it to a guy at Pittwater. I said, well, the best thing is start the engine and we'll go home. Well, we had a big discussion about that, but we finally did that, and we started the engine and set off and came back into Sydney Harbour and resigned from the race.
That was your Montague race, done
That
and
was
dusted.
my Montague race, yes.
But a year or so later, I mean, one of the most famous yachts ever out of this club was Ragamuffin, the original Ragamuffin, the 48-foot Sparkman Stevens boat, and I think it was everyone's dream to sail on Ragamuffin. Now, you had that dream realised. How did that come about, and what was the race?
Well, I knew Graham Newland pretty well, and I called into his marine dealership one day.
He was the sailing master at the time, I think,
That's
on Rago,
right.
wasn't he? Yeah.
And he just said to me, oh, what are you doing this weekend? Everyone seems to ask me what I'm doing this weekend. And I said, nothing much. And he said, well, we've got a race that I'd like you to come on. And I remembered straight away he was the sailing master, and I think he's not asking me to sail on Ragamuffin, is he? Because Ragamuffin was actually in Crooning Cove, berthed across the road from our house, so I used to see it quite a bit. So, make a long story short, yes, I went on Ragamuffin, and we drove down to Eden, picked the boat up and sailed around to Port Hicks, and sailed from Port Hicks to Botany Bay in that bicentenary race. The race was the first race that Ragamuffin had ever done completely to windward. We set the number one Genoa and the main at the start, which was about 5 knots, and then the wind kept coming in harder and harder, and all through the race, I think it was about a 2-day race, all through the race we kept changing from number 1 to number 2 and back again. And I remember Grumpy Ellis, who was in charge of the foredeck, and I had to go up and help with a couple of other guys change these sails. And every time he'd get up there, he'd say, where's that bloody Chris? And I'd say, I'm right behind you, Tony. He's, oh, okay.
Well, if you ever want to go to windward, you want to go to windward in Ragamuffin.
Absolutely.
But it was a one-off race, wasn't it? It was never. It was the bicentennial. It was 1970.
1970.
To celebrate the 200 years since Cook.
I think it was a celebration of 150 years.
150.
I think it was, but it was called a bicentenary race.
Yes, yeah.
And it was from Port Hicks to Sydney to Botany Bay, because that was the route that Cook took.
Yes.
And that's why. But you're right. It's a one-off race.
Yes. Yeah.
Perhaps when it's a 200-year or 250-year, they might invite me back.
Right. But meanwhile, you were still sailing Samiel, and with great success in the jog events, junior offshore group.
Correct.
And then that ended up taking you to England for a jog series. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I was secretary of the jogs, and the president was Torchy Uren, who owned a Sparkman and Stevens 30-footer called Stephanie J, and we raced together offshore. And he approached me one day, and he was a Qantas pilot, so he was always away and pretty busy. He approached me and said, I'd like you to try and form a crew to go to England to sail for the Captain Cook series, it was called. And it was a trophy that we had donated 4 or 5 years previously and went over there and sailed, but we'd lost it. So he asked me to form a crew. And we looked at taking 3 boats, and that was out of the question. So in the end, Ken Nicholson, who was also a Qantas pilot, resident in London, organised us to charter one boat over there just as a gesture that we were there. So I had the job of getting a crew. No sponsorship, we had to pay for everything. So I had to find 5 rich guys, 5 guys who could sail, and 5 guys who had time for 6 weeks away overseas, and I did that. And the crew was John Curry, Philip Edmonds, Paul Carey, Petey Omans and myself. So we went over there. We weren't successful in winning because we only had 1 boat, but then we chartered a few other boats. It was a bit of a mishmash, but we had a lot of fun. We got second and third in one of the races in the boat that I was on. And I think we met you there, Peter. We bumped into you in Regent Street, London, if I remember correctly.
That's right. Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah. But nonetheless, a great experience for you, the sailing over there.
It was a dream.
Yeah.
I think two dreams of mine stand out, and that was sailing on Ragamuffin, as you said, what a windward boat, and being chosen to go to England and represent my country. And I can hear when Olympians and people like that speak and being interviewed, and they say, you know, I represented my country. It never thought to me of anything, but now I've done it. And it's something I'll cherish forever.
Chris, I'll take you away from the actual water and put you into the business life. You ran a very successful marine company. Tell us a bit about Solo Marine.
Well, Graham Lambert, who was also a prominent yachtsman, or is a prominent yachtsman, and I were neighbours, and I had seen in England a winch handle pocket, which I thought was pretty good thing to have on your boat. We didn't have any on Samiel. So I bought a couple and brought them home, put them on Samiel, and I showed them to Graham one day, who was a plastics engineer. I said, Graham, we should be able to make these here and sell them. He said, oh, that's easy. You can make those in your wife's oven. And I said, oh, yeah, well, make one for me. So we did. We made a couple of those, and that started a company called Solo Plastics. From that, we gained a contract from a guy called Ron Marks, who was a water ski champion, and we made 1.5 million water ski bindings for his water skis over a period of quite a few years. So from that, then I bought Graham Lambert out of the company because he had other commitments, and we've remained friends ever since. And then I started Solo Marine because when I came back from England, I'd acquired a backstay adjuster from a company called Seashore in Southampton. And I started that company, and that was the first product we had. We put one on Seal 3, which won the Hobart race, and that was our big claim to fame, how we are. And as you rightly said, it just went on with lots of agencies, and we became the biggest marine agency in Australia at the time. But of course, and then we bought out another couple of companies. Some of those decisions were at the wrong time, at the wrong place, when interest rates were high and so forth. So eventually I sold Solo Marine, and I became an olive farmer.
Right. Well, I'll keep the name Solo going. One of the most famous, if not one of the famous yachts here out of the Cruising Yacht Club, double Hobart winner. She's in very poor condition, this up in Queensland, but you've had some involvement with Solo in recent times to try and refurbish her and get her on the water. Just give us a little bit of background there.
Well, let me tell you, firstly, Solo Marine and Solo Plastics came out of Solo here.
Graham, out of the name of the
yes,
yacht.
Graham right? And I were sitting in my lounge room one night thinking of a name to call our company, and I was going through the CYCA yearbook at the time. And I just went down the columns and I saw Solo, and I said to Graham, now look, there's a famous boat, very successful. We're going to be famous. We're going to be successful. Why don't we call it Solo?
Did Vic Meyer get a commission? Or he
no,
probably wanted a commission.
I don't think you even know why we did it, right? So we called it Solo Plastics, then it developed into Solo Marine. And I just loved the boat because it was such a good boat. It won every race on the eastern seaboard, and it had a tough skipper who taught a lot of people. And so when Solo came up for sale, I was actually the first person to go and have a look at it when the thought of buying it. This was pre-Samiel. And but I said to my son, Greg, if we buy this boat, we need to carry a 4-litre tin of oil, paint around with us forever. We need an electric welder and an oxy welder as well, because coming from an engineering background, I knew the work involved. Make a long story short, we didn't buy Solo, but I followed its career all through. And when it came up for sale recently, I approached John Cameron, who was Commodore at the time, and John Keelty, that if we could put together a deal to have it restored and in actual fact sold sailed in this race, the 75th race. But unfortunately that hasn't happened. And as you said, it's in poor condition. I have pictures of it at the moment on the Hard in Brisbane, and you can see through it from one end to the other. It is really, really sad. And it looks like it may go to the scrapyard. If anybody's out there that's got $1 million and wants to help us, we'd be lucky. We'd be happy to have it.
It's sad to hear, isn't it? Such a
very
famous
much
yacht
so.
ending up like that. But,
Exactly.
Let's hope that someone may pick up at the and run with it. But it's a big ask, I think. Isn't
A big ask. You're right.
Chris, these days, I mean, I know you're in great health and you're often around the club. You keep a keen interest in the racing and the yachts. What do you make of the yachts these days?
Well, to see them not in the water anymore and up on skis frightens the hell out of me. But I'm unfortunately, at 84 years old, I'm still very traditional, and I'm waiting for David to sell his Caprice of Huon, and I'd buy one of those back again. Forget the what I call the Weet-Bix boats, but I enjoy watching them. I mean, you can't help but look at boats like Comanche and particularly Blackjack. I follow that closely. They're just wonderful boats, and when you think of, I think it was Wayfarer, it took 11 days to get to Hobart. They're getting there in a day now. It's just unbelievable.
And over your 55 years of membership, you've seen a lot of physical changes to the club, and just recently the club's been refurbished again. It's still a pretty special place, isn't it?
Very much so. We come here quite often. We come mainly now to cruising functions and things like that. Yes, it'll always be my club, even if I get to the walking stick stage.
And I think you were quoted as saying that you've made a lot of friends in life, but most of the good friends you've got are through sailing.
Absolutely, yes. People like John Curry, Philip Edmonds, and I've got to say Bill Saltis, they are really, really my best friends. And I've always said, you make those friends because when you're out on a boat, 4 or 5 people in the middle of the ocean, all of us depend on each other. And I think you form some sort of bond. I mean, cricket and football and all that's good, but it's not the same as sailing. If you're up a mast out in the ocean, you'd want to know the guy that's handling that winch down there that knows what he's doing. And I've been up there and I know what it's like.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I know you're still very passionate about the sailing and the club. That's wonderful. And I know your archives is something that's very big on your agenda, so I'm sure you can contribute greatly there. So, Chris, thanks for your time. Congratulations on your effort with the club. It's been remarkable, and it's wonderful, as I said, to see you in such good health and following the sport. So we wish you well and a happy Christmas.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks a lot.